I still cannot believe we agreed to this, I muttered, adjusting my respiratory filters, as the environmental systems in the Grand Assembly Hall struggled to accommodate the 37 different atmospheric requirements of the gathered delegates. A human? At the Galactic Summit, the Council must have lost their collective minds. My associate Draz Vortanian fluttered his sensory appendages in what our species considers a shrug. The Terrans have been making quite a bit of noise lately, Tezor. Their faster-than-light breakthrough may have been unconventional, but it worked. And you know the rules. Any species that achieves independent interstellar travel gets an invitation. I snorted, expelling a small cloud of methane from my speech vents. Rules can be bent, Draz. They have been on the galactic stage for what? 3 standard cycles. That's practically nothing. Most species spend decades observing and learning protocol before they are allowed anywhere near a summit. Yes. Well, Draz said, his ocular stalks swiveling toward the entrance where delegates continued to arrive. The humans have a certain persistence. And after what happened in the Proxima incident, the Council thought it prudent to include rather than exclude the Proxima incident. I shuddered, remembering the diplomatic catastrophe that had unfolded when the Galactic Council attempted to establish a quarantine zone around Sol after the humans' unexpected FL breakthrough. The resulting confrontation had left 3 key outer cruisers disabled and a very embarrassed High Ambassador trying to explain how a single human vessel had managed to bypass our security grid using nothing but commercial mining equipment and what they called duct tape. Fine, I conceded, but did we have to invite Ambassador Jackson? That human has the diplomatic subtlety of a Vargarian bull in mating season. Draz made a sound that approximated laughter. The Terrans selected their representative, not us. And to be fair, Jackson did negotiate that trade agreement with the Zoltar Confederacy when everyone said it was impossible, by challenging the Zoltar trade minister to something called poker and winning their entire chromium reserve. That's not diplomacy, that's gambling. Our conversation halted as the vast doors at the far end of the hall parted with a ceremonial hiss. The grand announcer, a towering Phylaxian with voice sacs expanded to their full impressive size, boomed across the chamber, presenting the honorable delegate from Earth, Human Ambassador Telia Jackson of the Terran Cooperative. The assembled diplomats, bureaucrats, and dignitaries from over 200 worlds fell into a hushed silence as the humans strode into the hall. For those unfamiliar with the species, humans are peculiar bipeds with surprisingly little external protection, no scales, minimal fur, no natural armor whatsoever, and Ambassador Jackson exemplified these traits, standing at what I knew to be tall for their species, but comparatively small among the galactic community. She wore what humans call a suit, a bizarre fabric covering that offered no apparent defensive capabilities. Well, Draz whispered, at least she's not wearing that red leather jacket from the Proxima negotiations. I was about to respond when Ambassador Jackson stopped in the center of the hall, looked around at the assembled representatives of the most powerful civilizations in the known galaxy, and did something that would set the tone for everything that followed. She grinned. Not the careful, practiced smile of diplomacy, not the restrained acknowledgement of protocol. A wide, toothy, almost predatory display that on many worlds would be considered a direct challenge to combat. Hey everyone, she called out in clear, unfiltered common speech. Thanks for the invite. First time at one of these big shindigs. Hope I'm not underdressed. The Phylaxian announcer deflated slightly in shock. No delegate had ever spoken before the formal introductions were complete, a tradition upheld for over 12,000 years of galactic cooperation. I, Counselor Vexuban of the Myriad Worlds, a being composed primarily of bioluminescent gas contained within an exoskeleton of living crystal, floated down from the council platform. As the most senior member present, it was his duty to respond to breaches of protocol. The hall grew tense. Ambassador Jackson, Vexuban intoned, his voice resonating through specially designed acoustics, we welcome Earth to this gathering of worlds. However, I must inform you that according to summit traditions established since the First Contact era, delegates speak only when recognized by the Council. Yeah, I read the manual, Jackson interrupted, still smiling. All 7,000 pages of it. Fascinating stuff, especially Appendix C about emergency bathroom procedures for methane breathers. But here's the thing. I also read that the protocol was established in the Gelnar Accord, which Earth hasn't signed yet. So technically I'm not bound by it. A ripple of astonishment passed through the hall. She had found a loophole in the summit protocols. I exchanged glances with Draz, who seemed equally shocked. That is technically accurate, Vexhuben conceded after a moment of stunned silence. However, adherence to these customs is considered a basic courtesy. And I'm all about courtesy, Jackson said, walking forward to take her designated seat. But I'm also about efficiency. We have 342 agenda items to cover in 5 days, according to the schedule. At standard protocol speeds, we will be lucky to get through 40, so I thought I'd save us some time. The human settled into her chair, which had been hastily modified to accommodate human physiology. Most of the delegates were still staring at her, some with multiple sets of eyes or sensory organs. Please, she said, gesturing to the High Council platform. Don't let me disrupt things further. I'm just excited to be here. I leaned over to Draz. This is going to be a complete disaster. Or extremely entertaining, he replied. Possibly both. The formal introductions resumed, but the damage was done. Every representative was now watching the human with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright alarm. For a species so physically unremarkable, they had a remarkable talent for commanding attention. The first day's agenda focused on trade regulations for the Outer Rim territories, hardly the most exciting topic, but one with significant economic implications for dozens of worlds. As discussions progressed, I watched Jackson carefully. She remained surprisingly quiet during the initial presentations, taking notes on a primitive physical writing device rather than using the neural interfaces provided. When the Droban trade minister proposed increased tariffs on rare earth exports, citing security concerns, I expected the human to object forcefully, given Earth's growing industry in that sector. Instead, she simply raised her hand, another peculiarly human gesture, and waited to be recognized. The High Counselor Vexhuben, perhaps relieved by this sudden adherence to protocol, acknowledged her immediately. Ambassador Jackson, you wish to address the summit? Jackson stood, that unnerving smile still in place. Thank you, Counselor. I just have a quick question for Trade Minister Korbox. These security concerns you mentioned, would they happen to be related to the military buildup in the Droban homeworld's third moon, the one your government has officially denied exists, but which appears quite clearly on public stellar observatory data? The chamber erupted in murmurs and clicks of surprise. The Droban minister's chromatopers flushed deep purple with alarm. That is classified information, he sputtered. How did Google Maps Space Edition, Jackson replied with a shrug. It's publicly available software. Your cloaking technology is impressive, but it doesn't account for gravimetric distortion. Any kid with a decent telescope and our app can spot it. We posted a tutorial online last month. The Droban delegate was practically vibrating with rage, his translator struggling to keep up with his rapid-fire utterances.
This is outrageous.
The human is spying on sovereign Droban territory. Jackson's expression turned innocent. Spying? No. Spying would be if I mentioned the 7 unmarked Droban vessels currently mining illegally in the Proxima Neutral Zone. This is just astronomical hobbyists sharing interesting findings. Completely different. The revelation hit the assembly like a plasma discharge. The Droban illegal mining operations had been suspected but never proven. Until now, I watched as several delegates hurriedly conferred with their aides, clearly reassessing both their positions on the trade proposal and their understanding of human intelligence capabilities. Perhaps, Vexhuben suggested diplomatically, we should recess for a brief consultation period before continuing this discussion. Fine by me, Jackson said, sitting back down. I could use a coffee anyway. You guys have coffee here, right? Or something close? No? Worth asking. As the assembly dispersed for the recess, I approached Jackson, curiosity overcoming my professional reservations. Draz followed close behind, his data recorder discreetly activated. Ambassador Jackson, I began formally. I am Senior Diplomatic Observer Tassor Zan of the Vental Federation. May I have a word? The human looked up at me, quite a way up given that my species stands nearly 3 meters tall, and extended her hand. Another human custom I had been briefed on. Call me Talia, she said, and you must be the one they call the conscience of the Outer Rim. Your work on the Nexilian refugee crisis was impressive. I was momentarily taken aback that she knew this nickname, used primarily in diplomatic back channels. I took her small hand carefully in my manipulator claw. "You are well informed for a newcomer to galactic politics," I observed. Jackson laughed. "We might be new to your clubhouse, but we have been studying you all for decades. Ever since we picked up your first stray transmissions. You'd be surprised what humans consider light reading when they discover they are not alone in the universe." "Including classified security information," apparently Draz interjected. Jackson turned to him, assessing. "And you must be Draz Vortanian, the one who wrote that scathing analysis of human diplomatic potential. What was the phrase? About as likely to succeed in the galactic community as a Thanarian frostworm in a supernova." Draz's sensory frills flattened in embarrassment. "That was an internal document, not meant for public consumption?" "Yeah, well, your encryption needs work. Or maybe don't title sensitive files humans doomed to fail.gaildoc. And expect us not to notice when we are helping install your new communications array." I couldn't help but emit an amused methane puff. "She has you there, Draz." Jackson winked at me. Another human gesture I'd need to research later. "Look," she said, suddenly more serious. "I know my approach seems unorthodox to you all, but Earth is playing catch-up in a game where everyone else has had millennia of head start. We don't have the luxury of spending 3 generations learning proper protocol before we get a say in decisions that affect our world. So instead you disrupt centuries of tradition and embarrass established powers on your first day?" I asked. "I'd prefer to think of it as making an impression," she replied. "Besides, the Droban mining operation is harming the ionosphere of Proxima b, which Earth has colonists on. We tried the traditional channels to address it, filed 17 complaints through the proper bureaus, got ignored 17 times. This was news to me. The Council didn't respond to formal complaints about treaty violations." "Oh, they responded," Jackson said, "with form letters about processing times and investigative queues estimated at 27 Earth years." "That's not how the system is supposed to work," I admitted. "Hence my approach." She gestured around the Grand Hall. "Sometimes you need to short-circuit the bureaucracy to get results. I'm betting that mining operation gets shut down within a week now that everyone knows about it." Before I could respond, a commotion erupted across the chamber. The Droban delegation was engaged in what appeared to be a heated argument with representatives from the Exolian Commonwealth, traditional rivals whose territory bordered the disputed Proxima sector. "Right on schedule," Jackson murmured, checking a device on her wrist. "Excuse me, but I need to go play innocent bystander while the Exolians demand inspection rights." As she walked away, Draz turned to me. "You realize what she's doing, don't you? She deliberately provoked this confrontation to force action on the mining issue." "Yes," I said slowly, watching as Jackson casually inserted herself into the growing cluster of delegates surrounding the argument. "The question is, what else has she planned?" The answer came sooner than expected. When the summit reconvened, the agenda had been hastily amended to address the Proxima situation. The Droban delegation, cornered by evidence they couldn't deny, was forced to agree to a formal inspection of the neutral zone. It was a diplomatic victory for Earth that would normally have taken years to achieve. But Jackson wasn't done. As the discussion turned to the original trade regulation proposal, now thoroughly undermined by the Droban embarrassment, the human ambassador raised her hand again. "Since we are talking about fair trade," she said when recognized, "I'd like to propose a motion to review the classification system for emerging species." A profound silence fell over the assembly. The classification system was one of the most fundamental structures of galactic governance, determining everything from trade rights to territorial expansion limits for each species based on their technological development level. Earth had been classified as a Level 2 emerging civilization, granted limited interstellar travel rights, but restricted from many advanced technologies and excluded from numerous economic opportunities. "That system has been in place for over 50,000 years, Ambassador," Vexuban responded carefully. "It ensures stable development and prevents cultural contamination. It's also wildly inconsistent and suspiciously beneficial to the founding members of the Council," Jackson countered. "Earth has been classified as Level 2 despite having developed independent FTL travel, quantum computing and limited matter energy conversion. Meanwhile, the Viridian Collective is classified as Level 4 with full technology sharing rights, despite still struggling with basic antimatter containment." More uncomfortable murmurs spread through the chamber. What Jackson had said was true. The system had long been manipulated to favor certain political allies, but it was never discussed so openly. The proper forum for reclassification petitions is the Developmental Review Board. Another counselor interjected. Not the summit floor. We submitted our petition to the board 18 months ago, Jackson replied. It was tabled indefinitely, just like every petition from non-council worlds in the last 30 years. She pulled up a holographic display from her seat console, projecting it for all to see. Here's the statistical analysis. Species from founding council worlds receive reclassification approval in an average of 3.2 standard years, non-council worlds. 76.8 years. Species from disputed territories. Never approved. The data hung in the air, damning in its clarity. Where did you get this information? Demanded a Zexilian representative, his facial tentacles writhing in agitation. Public records, Jackson said simply. We just compiled them. Apparently we are the first ones who bothered to check. I watched as various delegates shifted uncomfortably or conferred urgently with their aides. The human had just publicly exposed one of the open secrets of galactic politics. That the meritocratic system we proudly proclaimed was in fact manipulated to maintain the existing power structure. This is outrageous, the Zexilian continued. The human delegation is attempting to disrupt established order for their own gain. Jackson's expression hardened for the first time. No, what's outrageous is that civilizations with the technological capability to end hunger, disease, and energy scarcity are denied access to those advancements because they don't have the right political connections. Earth isn't the only victim of this system. We are just the first ones willing to call it what it is, a protection racket. The translator rendered her final phrase with perfect clarity, and I winced. In galactic diplomatic circles, one simply didn't use such language. Ambassador Jackson, Vexhuben said, his crystalline form pulsing with what I recognized as stress patterns, I must caution you on your tone and accusations. The summit operates on principles of mutual respect. Respect is earned, Jackson interrupted again. And a system that values political convenience over objective criteria hasn't earned it. But I'm not just here to complain. She tapped her console again, and a new set of data appeared. I'm here to propose a solution. What followed was, I had to admit, impressively comprehensive. Jackson outlined a reformed classification system based on objective technological and social development markers, with transparent review processes and appeals mechanism. It was radical, but undeniably fair, perhaps too fair for those accustomed to privilege. We can implement this gradually over 10 standard years, she concluded, minimizing disruption while ensuring equitable treatment for all member species. The full proposal has just been transmitted to your personal data channels. Sure enough, my own communication device chimed with the incoming document. A massive, detailed policy paper that must have taken months to prepare. This is highly irregular. Another council member sputtered, such fundamental changes require extensive committee review and I move to create a special review committee to evaluate Ambassador Jackson's proposal, came a voice from the back of the chamber. To my shock, it was the representative from Novalera, one of the smaller, traditionally marginalized worlds that would benefit significantly from the proposed changes. I second the motion, called another delegate, then another. Within moments, a dozen representatives had voiced support. The council members exchanged alarmed glances as they realized the momentum building. Jackson just sat there, watching with that same unsettling smile. Very well, Vexhuben conceded eventually. A committee will be formed to examine the proposal, but I must emphasize that any potential changes would require extensive review and— Thank you, Counselor. Jackson cut in smoothly. Earth looks forward to participating in the committee. And to demonstrate our commitment to transparency, I have taken the liberty of making our proposal public. It's being transmitted to every member world's general information network as we speak. This time, the uproar was immediate and intense. Making internal summit proposals public before official approval was simply not done. The political implications were enormous. Citizens across hundreds of worlds would now be aware of Earth's proposal, creating pressure on their representatives to support it. Ambassador. Vexhuben's voice boomed with rare emotion. That is a severe breach of what exactly? Jackson asked innocently. There's no regulation against public disclosure in the summit charter. I checked. Twice. Actually, Unless, of course, there's some reason the Council doesn't want the general public to know what's being discussed here. The question hung in the air like a drawn weapon. She had maneuvered the Council into an impossible position. Object to transparency and appear to be hiding something, or accept it and lose control of the narrative. As the session dissolved into chaos with delegates arguing vociferously among themselves, I made my way over to Draws, who was frantically analyzing the human's proposal on his data pad. "This is actually quite brilliant," he admitted reluctantly. "Substantively fair and politically shrewd. The smaller worlds will rally behind it immediately. Even some mid-tier powers might see advantages. She planned this entire scenario," I realized. The Droban confrontation was just a distraction, a way to demonstrate Earth's intelligence capabilities while positioning herself as a defender of treaty obligations. It gave her credibility for this larger move. "One human," Draz muttered, "one human at her first summit, and she's rewriting rules that have stood for millennia." We both turned to look at Ambassador Jackson, who was now calmly sipping from a container of what I presumed was the coffee she had mentioned earlier, watching the turmoil she had created with apparent satisfaction. "The summit is scheduled to last 5 more days, I said quietly. "Imagine what she might do tomorrow." Draz's sensory appendages drooped in dismay. "The Council will never allow this to continue. They will find some procedural way to limit her actions or exclude Earth entirely." "I'm not so sure," I replied, observing the growing number of delegates approaching Jackson with what appeared to be expressions of support. "Look around, Draz. For every established power that's outraged, there are 3 smaller worlds that see opportunity. She's building a coalition right before our eyes." "But that's not how things are done," he insisted. I emitted a thoughtful methane puff. "Perhaps that's precisely the problem she's addressing." As the first day of the summit finally adjourned, hours behind schedule and with the carefully planned agenda in shambles, I watched Ambassador Jackson leave the chamber, surrounded by representatives from worlds that had never before had common cause. She caught my eye as she passed and gave me another of those strange human gestures, a slight nod and what I now recognized as a genuine smile, not the challenging grin from earlier. In that moment I understood something fundamental about humans that our briefings had failed to capture. They weren't just persistent or clever or adaptable, though they were certainly all of those things. They were impatient, unwilling to accept the slow, grinding wheels of a system that had calcified over millennia. "What do you think will happen tomorrow?" Draz asked as we gathered our materials. I gazed at the empty doorway where Jackson had departed. "I have no idea, but for the first time in 200 years of diplomatic service, I'm actually looking forward to finding out." Little did I know that the real disruption hadn't even begun. The second day of the Galactic Summit began with what could only be described as a diplomatic hangover. The Grand Hall, normally a model of order and decorum, buzzed with urgent conversations and hurried consultations. Several delegation pods had been rearranged overnight, with smaller worlds clustering together in what was clearly a response to Ambassador Jackson's classification proposal. "The Council has been in emergency session since midnight," Draz informed me as we took our positions. 3 separate motions to expel the Earth delegation were proposed and rejected. "Rejected?" I asked, surprised. "By whom?" "The Procedural Review Committee of all groups. Apparently they couldn't find any regulation that Jackson had technically violated. She skirted the edge of protocol but never quite crossed it." I adjusted my atmospheric filters, which seemed to be working overtime today, and the classification proposal already has 47 worlds publicly supporting it, Draz said grimly, including, shockingly, Vendara Prime. That was unexpected. Vendara Prime was a mid-tier power with traditionally conservative views on galactic governance. What prompted their support? Draz's sensory appendages twitched in what I recognized as his equivalent of an eye roll. The Vendaran ambassador received over 3 million public messages overnight from citizens demanding they back the proposal. Turns out humans didn't just make their proposal public. They created simplified versions in every major galactic language with helpful graphics explaining how each world would benefit, along with direct communication links to relevant representatives. "Social pressure tactics," I mused. "Clever. It's unprecedented interference in sovereign diplomatic processes," Draz countered. "Is it, though?" The information was factual. The citizens made their own decisions to contact their representatives. Isn't that how democracy is supposed to work? Dres gave me a look that questioned my sanity. We are diplomats. Tezor, our job is to make decisions without the messy complications of public opinion. Perhaps that's part of the problem, I murmured, but before we could continue, the chamber doors slid open. Instead of the human ambassador we expected, a procession of council security personnel entered, escorting a hovering platform that bore High Counselor Vexu Bin. His crystalline form pulsed with formal communication patterns, a sign that an important announcement was imminent. Distinguished delegates. Vexu Bin began once the platform reached the central speaking position. In light of yesterday's unprecedented discussions, the High Council has determined that an adjustment to our agenda is necessary. The matter of species classification reform will be formally added to the summit's schedule, with dedicated sessions beginning tomorrow. A mixture of approving and dismayed sounds filled the chamber. Furthermore, Vexu Bin continued, to ensure that all perspectives are adequately represented, the Council has formed a special advisory committee comprising representatives from each development classification tier. Ambassador Jackson will serve as the Level 2 representative. This was a masterful political maneuver. By officially acknowledging the issue and creating a committee, the Council appeared responsive, while simultaneously containing Jackson within the very bureaucratic structure she had criticized. I had to admire the elegance of the solution. "Where is the human ambassador?" asked the Draconor representative, his massive reptilian head swiveling to scan the chamber. As if on cue, the doors opened again and Ambassador Jackson entered. But she wasn't alone. Walking beside her was another human, taller, darker-skinned, with short gray hair and a bearing that suggested military background. Behind them came 3 more humans, each carrying what appeared to be data equipment. "What is the meaning of this?" demanded Councillor Zach Fearn of the Hegemony. Earth was granted 1 representative, not an entourage. Jackson smiled that now familiar challenging smile. "Councillor, if you check Section 17, Paragraph 4 of the Summit Charter, you will find that any recognized delegation may bring technical advisors when presenting to formal committees. Since I have been appointed to the Classification Committee, I have brought our technical team to help present our case." She gestured to the humans behind her. "May I introduce Dr. Maya Patel, our xenobiology specialist, Commander James Wilson, military liaison, Dr. Leo Takahashi, advanced systems engineer, and Dr. Sophia Nkosi, cultural anthropologist." The council representatives conferred hurriedly among themselves, clearly trying to find a procedural objection. Finding none, Vexu Bin reluctantly acknowledged the human team. "Very well. The technical advisors may remain for the Classification Committee sessions. However, for today's scheduled discussions on interstellar transit regulations, only the primary delegate may participate." "Of course," Jackson agreed pleasantly. "My colleagues will just observe today. Learning the ropes, you know." The humans took seats in the Earth delegation pod, which seemed to have been hastily expanded overnight to accommodate them. Jackson proceeded to her designated speaker position as the day's agenda commenced. I leaned toward Draz. "This doesn't make sense. Why bring additional personnel for a committee that won't meet until tomorrow?" "Perhaps it's just another show of force," Draz suggested. "Human posturing." But something felt off about the situation. Jackson had proven herself too strategically minded for meaningless gestures. The morning session proceeded with surprising normality. The discussion of interstellar transit corridors was technical and frankly dull, concerning hyperspace lane maintenance fees and navigational beacon standardization. Jackson participated minimally, offering occasional clarifications about Earth's navigation systems, but otherwise allowing the discussion to follow its traditional plodding pace. During the midday recess, I noticed the human technical team had disappeared. Jackson remained, engaged in conversation with representatives from several Outer Rim worlds. Curious, I approached one of my contacts in Summit Security. The human advisors requested a tour of the Environmental Control Center. The security officer told me, apparently they were concerned about atmospheric calibration for their delegation pod, standard procedure. Something about this triggered my diplomatic instincts. Did anyone accompany them? Of course, a junior technician was assigned as guide. The security officer checked his datapad. They returned to the main chamber 20 minutes ago. Except they hadn't. I had been watching the Earth delegation pod continuously, and the advisors had not returned. I was considering whether to voice my concerns when the afternoon session began. The agenda turned to a routine review of the Galactic Non-Interference Directive, the principle that governed interaction with pre-FTL civilizations. It was largely a formality, as the directive had remained unchanged for over 3,000 years. The floor recognizes Ambassador Jackson of Earth, Vixuban announced after the initial presentation. Jackson stood, her demeanor noticeably more formal than the previous day. Thank you, High Counselor. Earth wishes to express its support for the Non-Interference Directive's fundamental principles. As a species that developed without external influence, we recognize the importance of allowing civilizations to advance at their own pace. There were surprised murmurs throughout the chamber. After yesterday's disruptions, many had expected another challenge to established policy. However, Jackson continued, we believe the current implementation of the directive deserves review. Specifically, the classification of 73 species as perpetually pre-advanced due to biological or environmental factors. And there it was. Another carefully aimed strike at one of the more problematic aspects of galactic policy. The perpetually pre-advanced designation was applied to species deemed incapable of achieving higher technology levels independently, effectively condemning them to permanent observation status with no path to membership in the galactic community. These 73 species include the aquatic vril of Deneb IV, the silicon-based Lithocians, and the collective consciousness organisms of the Tau Nebula. Jackson elaborated. All intelligent, all demonstrably capable of complex thought and social organization, yet all denied the opportunity for advancement based on physical characteristics rather than actual potential. The Zaxxilian representative bristled visibly. These species lack the physical capability to develop technological civilizations. The Virul have no manipulator appendages. The Lithatians cannot harness fire in their methane atmosphere. It is a biological reality, not discrimination. Is it, though? Jackson asked mildly, because that sounds remarkably similar to arguments once made about my own species. Early assessment reports on humans questioned our potential based on our relatively weak muscular structure, lack of natural defenses, and short lifespans. She tapped her console and historical records appeared on the central display, actual xenobiological evaluations of humans from the centuries when Earth was under observation. The dismissive tone of the assessments was embarrassingly obvious. The human species shows limited potential due to biological constraints, Jackson read from one report. Their skeletal structure is fragile, their sensory capabilities rudimentary, and their short reproductive cycle suggests an evolutionary strategy focused on quantity over quality. Recommended classification, development potential category 3 limited. She looked up with an expression of innocent inquiry. And yet here we are. Turns out we found ways to compensate for our biological limitations. Tools, cooperation, specialized knowledge. The very foundations of technology. I had to admire the elegant simplicity of her argument. By using humanity as the example, she made any defense of the current system sound like an attack on a member species. What exactly are you proposing, Ambassador? Asked the representative from the Galactic Archive, one of the few truly neutral entities in galactic politics. Jackson's expression brightened. I'm so glad you asked. Earth proposes a developmental partnership initiative for these 73 species. Not interference partnership, providing tools and interfaces specifically designed for their biological capabilities, allowing them to develop technology compatible with their nature. The chamber erupted in exclamations and debates. The idea was revolutionary, and to many deeply alarming. The Non-Interference Directive was one of the most sacred principles of galactic governance. This would fundamentally alter the development trajectory of these species, objected the Zaxxilian. It violates the very spirit of the directive, does it? Though, Jackson countered, the directive was created to prevent cultural contamination and allow natural development, but we have defined natural development solely in terms of our own evolutionary experiences. Species with manipulator limbs, land-based habitats, oxygen atmospheres, we have imposed our biological biases on the definition of advancement itself. She paused, looking around the chamber. Consider this. If the galaxy had been discovered first by the Lithocians, would we oxygen breathers have been classified as perpetually pre-advanced because we can't survive in methane? Would our inability to communicate through crystalline resonance have deemed us incapable of true intelligence? The question hung in the air, uncomfortably perceptive. I noticed several delegates from the more philosophically inclined species nodding in agreement. "This is absurd," the Droban minister interjected. "Next you will suggest giving spaceflight technology to primitive Stone Age species." "Not at all," Jackson replied calmly. "We are talking about species with demonstrated intelligence and social organization equivalent to FTL-capable species, held back only by physical limitations. The Virul, for instance, have mathematical systems more advanced than many Council worlds, developed entirely for navigating ocean currents. Imagine what they could contribute to hyperspace navigation theory if given the tools to participate." Before the debate could continue, the chamber's lighting flickered momentarily. The environmental systems made an unusual whirring sound, then stabilized. "Minor power fluctuation," announced the automated system. "Backup systems engaged. Continuing normal operations." Most delegates barely noticed the interruption, but I saw Jackson glance at her wrist device with what appeared to be satisfaction. The debate on the non-interference directive continued for another hour, growing increasingly heated. Philosophical and ethical arguments clashed with practical and political concerns. Throughout it all, Jackson maintained a position of reasonable advocacy, never pushing too hard but never backing down. It was only when the session ended that the true purpose of the day's events became clear. As delegates prepared to adjourn, Jackson stood one final time. "Before we conclude, I would like to address a matter of some delicacy. It has come to Earth's attention that certain administrative irregularities exist within the summit's operational structure." Vexuban's crystalline form pulsed with caution patterns. "Ambassador, if you have concerns about administrative matters, the proper channel is through the Operations Bureau, not the summit floor." "Under normal circumstances, I would agree," Jackson said. "However, these irregularities directly impact the fundamental fairness of summit proceedings. Specifically, the matter of selective information access." She tapped her console again, and to the shock of everyone present, a complex security interface appeared on the main display, the internal access logs for the summit's central data repository. "What you are seeing," Jackson explained calmly, "is evidence that certain delegations have been granted unrestricted access to summit data, including private communication between delegations, preliminary position papers, and even confidential voting intentions." The chamber went absolutely still. If true, this was beyond scandal. It was a violation of the most basic trust underlying galactic diplomacy. "These accusations are outrageous," sputtered a council member. "The data systems are secure and neutral, managed by independent technicians from the Zixilian Technical Corps, the Droban Security Collective, and the Hegemony Analytics Division." Jackson finished for him. "All representing first-tier powers with direct council representation. Convenient." She tapped her console again, and the display shifted to show specific access logs, highlighting patterns of data retrieval that clearly favored certain delegations. "How did you obtain this information?" demanded Vexuban, his voice resonating with alarm. Jackson smiled. "My technical advisors conducted a security audit during their tour of the facility. Standard procedure for Earth when entering new information-sharing agreements. We were quite thorough. And suddenly, the purpose of the additional humans became clear. The Environmental Control Center would have network access points to all summit systems for monitoring purposes. While everyone was distracted by the non-interference debate, Earth's technical team had been gathering evidence. "This is an unauthorized intrusion into secure systems," the Zexilian representative thundered. "Is it though?" Jackson asked, her voice innocent. "According to the summit charter, all member species have the right to verify the security of shared information systems. It's right there in Appendix G, which I'm sure everyone has read as carefully as I have." She looked around the chamber, her expression hardening slightly. "What we found was that while most delegations are restricted to their own data partitions, 9 specific worlds have unrestricted administrator access to the entire system. Coincidentally, these 9 worlds hold permanent council seats. The implications were devastating. For centuries, the council had presented itself as a meritocratic leadership group selected based on wisdom and fair governance. The revelation that they had been systematically spying on other delegations undermined the very foundation of their authority. "These are serious allegations that require investigation," Vexuban said, attempting to regain control of the situation. "A full security audit will be already completed." Jackson interrupted, holding up a data crystal. My team has prepared a comprehensive report, including timestamps, access logs, and retrieved file lists. Copies are being distributed to all delegations as we speak. Sure enough, communication devices throughout the chamber began chiming as the report arrived. In the interest of transparency, Jackson continued, Earth has also taken the liberty of creating a new information security protocol for the summit. All access will be logged and visible to all delegations. Administrative privileges will be rotated among species from different classification tiers on a daily basis, and an independent audit committee with randomly selected members will oversee the entire system. She paused, looking directly at the council platform. Unless, of course, there's some reason why equal access to information would be problematic. The question was a trap, and everyone knew it. To object would be to admit the existing system was deliberately designed to be unfair. After a moment of tense silence, Vex Uben's crystalline form pulsed with resignation patterns. The Council will review Earth's security recommendations and implement appropriate measures to ensure fairness. Wonderful, Jackson said brightly. We look forward to working together on this issue. Oh, and one more thing. She tapped her console a final time and the main display changed to show a complex legal document. While reviewing the summit charter for clarity on security protocols, we happened to notice Article 229, subsection C, paragraph 117. It states that any species demonstrating exceptional contribution to the advancement of galactic governance may petition for accelerated classification review. Jackson smiled. Earth hereby formally petitions for such review based on our contributions to information security, equity, and classification reform. The petition has been filed with the Developmental Review Board, with supporting documentation demonstrating how our proposals meet the criteria for exceptional contribution. And with that she sat down, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. As the session finally adjourned, delegates poured out in a chaos of urgent conversations and hurried communications with their homeworlds. The political landscape of the galaxy had shifted more in 2 days than in the previous century. I found myself walking alongside Jackson as we exited the chamber. Curiosity overcame professional distance. That was quite a performance, Ambassador, I said. 2 days and you have challenged the classification system, the non-interference directive, and exposed Council surveillance operations. Jackson looked up at me, her expression surprisingly thoughtful. Not a performance, Observer Tesser. Necessity. Earth can't afford to wait decades for equitable treatment, not with the threats we are facing. Threats? I asked, surprised by the shift in tone. She glanced around, then lowered her voice. The Droban military buildup isn't just about mining rights. The Zexilian deep space sensors aren't just for research. Something's coming from the galactic rim, something that has the major powers preparing for conflict while keeping smaller worlds in the dark. A chill ran through my methane circulatory system. What evidence do you have of this? Enough to be concerned. Deployment patterns, resource allocations, classified research initiatives focused on weapons technology, all while official statements emphasize peace and stability. If this is true, why expose the Council's information advantage? Wouldn't that hinder their preparations? Jackson's expression turned grim. Because preparation without cooperation is doomed to fail. Whatever's coming, we will need a united response, not a privileged few worlds trying to save themselves while leaving the rest as buffer zones. The implications were staggering. If Jackson was right, the human disruption of summit protocols wasn't just about Earth's status, it was about galactic survival. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because you are respected, Tezor. Your reports circulate among mid-tier worlds, and you actually care about more than just your species' advantage. She gave me a small smile. Also, I read your dissertation on interspecies cooperation dynamics. Impressive work. Before I could respond, her technical advisors approached, led by the gray-haired military officer, Commander Wilson. We have got movement, he said quietly. 14 delegations have requested private meetings. 3 council members among them. Jackson nodded. Looks like we got their attention. What happens now? I asked. She turned back to me with that challenging grin that had started it all. Now the real work begins. Building coalitions, sharing information, preparing. The old way of doing things, secretive, hierarchical, slow, won't cut it anymore. The Council won't surrender power easily. I warned. They don't have to surrender it, Jackson replied. They just have to share it. And if they are smart, they will realize that's in their interest too. As she walked away with her team, Draz approached, his sensory appendages quivering with excitement. Do you know what just happened? He asked. The Novalarians have officially endorsed Earth's classification petition, so have the Vendoran Alliance and the Outer Rim Collective. That's almost 30% of summit voting power already. I was only half listening, my thoughts racing with the implications of what Jackson had told me. Draz, I said slowly, access the classified report on deep space sensor anomalies from the Vental Border outposts, the ones from the past 3 cycles. Those are restricted to Security Committee members, he reminded me. Just do it. Use my override codes. As Draz worked his communication device, I watched Jackson across the atrium, now surrounded by representatives from worlds of every size and classification. In just 2 days, she had transformed from an upstart newcomer to the center of a rapidly forming power block. Here it is, Draz said, showing me his screen. But I don't see these energy signatures. They are similar to what the Zexilian Research Division has been studying. And look at the trajectory projections. The data confirmed Jackson's warning. Something was indeed approaching from the galactic rim, something that had alarmed the major powers enough to begin secret preparations. We need to talk to the Vental Security Council immediately, I said, about the anomalies. About forming an alliance with Earth, I replied, and supporting their classification petition. Draz stared at me in shock. You can't be serious, after all the disruption they have caused. I looked again at Ambassador Jackson, now deep in conversation with representatives from a dozen worlds that had never before found common ground. The disruption is the point, Draz. The old system isn't working. Hasn't been working for centuries. We have just been too comfortable to notice. I gestured toward the human delegation. They invited a human to the summit and now regret it. But the rest of us might end up owing them our survival. 3 days later, Earth's petition for accelerated classification review passed with unprecedented support. 2 weeks after that, the new information security protocols were implemented across all summit systems. Within a standard cycle, the first developmental partnerships with previously excluded species were established. And when the threat from the galactic rim finally revealed itself, a vast swarm of semi-organic harvester entities beyond anything in our records, the galaxy faced it with united defenses and shared technology that would have been impossible under the old regime. All because we invited a human to the Galactic Summit, and she refused to play by rules that no longer served their purpose. As Jackson said to me years later, when we jointly chaired the Interspecies Defense Coordination Committee, sometimes the greatest contribution you can make is disruption, especially when what you are disrupting needs to change. The Council never did forgive her for those first tumultuous days, but the rest of the galaxy has never stopped thanking her and the unpredictable species she represented for forcing us to become better than we were.